What would you do if a desperate mother, cold and starving, begged you to let her and her newborn babies into your home on a stormy night? Would you risk everything to save them, not knowing the danger or the miracle that might follow? This is the story of one woman's choice to open her door and how it changed all their lives forever. Let us know where you're watching from. The snowstorm came without warning that January evening. Emma Harper had just put her 10-month-old son Theo to bed and was enjoying a rare moment of peace in her small country home when she first heard the scratching. At first, she ignored it, thinking it was just the wind rattling the old wooden door. But then came a soft whine. Unmistakably a dog, followed by something that sounded almost like crying. Emma peered through the frost-covered window. There, illuminated by the porch light against the swirling snow, stood a German shepherd, her coat matted and thin, ribs clearly visible even through her thick winter fur. But what made Emma gasp was the sight of 4 tiny puppies huddled against their mother's belly, shivering violently in the bitter cold. "Oh my God," Emma whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. The mother dog looked directly at her through the window, amber eyes filled with a desperate plea that transcended any language barrier between human and animal. She scratched at the door again, gentler this time, as if afraid of appearing threatening. In the nursery, Theo began to stir. Emma could hear him through the baby monitor, making the small babbling sounds that usually preceded waking. She hesitated, torn between caution and compassion. She lived alone since her husband's military deployment overseas, and taking in a stray dog, especially one with puppies, seemed overwhelming. What if the dog was dangerous? What if it was sick? But as she watched, one of the puppies collapsed into the snow, its tiny body barely moving. The mother dog nudged it frantically, looking back at the door with even greater urgency. Emma made her decision. She grabbed her phone, ready to call for help if needed, and slowly opened the door. The German shepherd didn't rush in. Instead, she stayed perfectly still, her eyes never leaving Emma's. Only when Emma stepped back and whispered, "It's okay," did the dog carefully pick up the weakest puppy in her mouth and step over the threshold. The other 3 puppies stumbled in after her, leaving tiny paw prints in the entryway. From his room, Theo's babbling grew louder, turning into the familiar sound that meant he was fully awake now. The mother dog's ears perked up at the sound of the baby, and she turned toward the hallway leading to the nursery. "No, stay," Emma said firmly, heart racing. The dog immediately sat, still holding her puppy, looking at Emma with such intelligence that it was startling. Emma quickly gathered old blankets and arranged them in the corner of the living room, gesturing for the dog to come. "Here, this is for you." The mother dog approached cautiously, placed her weakest puppy on the blanket, then returned to the door to gently carry each remaining puppy to the makeshift bed, one by one. Once they were all settled, she began frantically licking the smallest one, her movements growing more desperate when the puppy barely responded. "He's too cold," Emma realized. Without thinking about the potential danger, she knelt beside the dog and gently picked up the fading puppy. The mother tensed but didn't growl, watching intently as Emma cradled the tiny body against her chest, under her sweater, sharing her body heat. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, feeling the puppy's faint heartbeat against her skin. "You're safe now." Theo's cries now grew insistent from the nursery. The mother dog whined, looking between Emma and the hallway as if understanding there was another baby needing attention. "I have to get my son," Emma explained, not knowing if the dog could understand but feeling she should say it anyway. "Please stay here." She carefully returned the slightly warmer puppy to its mother and hurried to Theo's room. When she returned with her son on her hip, she froze in the doorway. The German Shepherd was standing in the middle of the living room, watching her with those intelligent amber eyes, waiting. Theo immediately stopped fussing. He leaned forward in Emma's arms, making excited noises and reaching toward the dog with his chubby hands. The German Shepherd's tail gave a single, hesitant wag. In that moment, something passed between the two mothers, one human, one canine, both fiercely protective of their young, both vulnerable in their own ways. Emma saw herself reflected in those amber eyes, the exhaustion, the worry, the overwhelming love for their children. "Okay," Emma whispered, sitting on the couch with Theo. "We'll figure this out." The dog returned to her puppies, but kept her eyes on Emma and Theo, watchful, yet somehow trusting. As the snow continued to fall outside, creating a white wall that separated them from the rest of the world, Emma made a bottle for Theo and reached for her phone. She needed to call a vet. The smallest puppy was still barely moving, but the storm had knocked out the cell service. They were on their own, at least until morning. "I'll call you Stella," Emma said softly to the mother dog, remembering the Latin word for star. Because somehow, on this dark winter night, this dog had found her way to the one house on this rural road that had a light on, like she had been following a star of her own. Stella blinked slowly at her new name, and for the first time, her tail wagged with more confidence. One of the stronger puppies, a little female with a white patch shaped like a crescent moon on her chest, managed to stand on wobbly legs and take a few steps toward Theo before tumbling over her own paws. Theo laughed, a bright, bubbling sound that seemed to fill the room with warmth. And Emma could have sworn that Stella smiled. Little did Emma know that this snowy night was just the beginning of a story that would change all their lives forever, and that the biggest surprises were yet to come. As the night deepened, Emma created a makeshift heating pad using a hot water bottle wrapped in towels for the weakest puppy. She'd named him Flicker, because his life seemed to flicker like a candle flame in the wind, sometimes growing stronger, sometimes fading. The other puppies she called Luna, the one with the crescent moon marking, Ash, a male with smoky gray patches, and Ember, a rusty-colored female with unusual amber eyes like her mother. Emma placed Flicker against the gentle heat, monitoring his breathing. "Come on, little one," she whispered, stroking his tiny head with her finger. "Fight." Stella watched Emma's every move, her eyes never leaving her weakest pup. When Emma finally returned Flicker to his mother, Stella began licking him vigorously, as if trying to transfer her own life force into his small body. Through the night, Emma dozed on the couch with Theo sleeping on her chest, waking frequently to check on the dogs. Around 3 a.m., she startled awake to find Stella standing beside the couch, whining softly. At first, Emma's heart raced with fear, but then she realized Stella wasn't threatening them. She was asking for help. Emma followed Stella back to the blanket nest where Flicker lay motionless, barely breathing. Without hesitation, Emma scooped him up and began rubbing his tiny body, trying to stimulate circulation. His body was cold, too cold. In desperation, she opened her pajama top and placed him directly against her skin, covering him with her hand to create a warm cocoon. "Please," she whispered, not even sure who she was pleading with. "Please don't let him die." For nearly an hour, Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, holding Flicker against her heart, whispering encouragement while Stella pressed against her side, their shoulders touching. The other puppies slept in a pile, unaware of the life-and-death struggle happening inches away. Just when Emma had begun to lose hope, she felt it, the faintest movement against her skin. Then another. Flicker was moving, his tiny legs making weak paddling motions. His little mouth opened in a silent yawn. "He's fighting," Emma told Stella, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He's not giving up." Stella whined softly and licked Emma's hand, a gesture so tender it made fresh tears spring to Emma's eyes. In that moment, the barrier between human and animal seemed to dissolve completely. They were just two mothers, united in their determination to protect the vulnerable lives in their care. By dawn, Flicker was nursing weakly but steadily. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine white landscape and blessed cell service. Emma called the local veterinarian, Dr. Abrams, who promised to come as soon as the roads were cleared. They were abandoned, Dr. Abrams declared that afternoon, after examining Stella and her puppies in Emma's living room. He was an older man with kind eyes and gentle hands that belied their skill. "Stella's too thin, and these puppies can't be more than 3 weeks old. Someone dumped them, probably when they realized how much work 4 puppies would be." Anger flashed through Emma. Who would do that in a snowstorm? Dr. Abrams shrugged sadly. "You'd be surprised what people are capable of. But she found you, and that's what matters now." He smiled as he watched Theo, who was sitting in his playpen, completely fascinated by the puppies safely contained on a blanket beside him. "Seems like your little one approves of the new additions." "They can't stay," Emma said quickly, though the words brought an unexpected pang. "I mean, once they're healthy, they'll need proper homes. I can't possibly—" Dr. Abrams nodded, but there was a knowing look in his eyes. "Of course. We'll help find homes when the time comes. For now, they need about 4 more weeks with their mother before weaning. Flicker here might need supplements. I'll leave some puppy formula with you." After the vet left, Emma sat on the floor beside the playpen, watching as Theo reached through the mesh sides, giggling whenever one of the stronger puppies came close enough for him to touch their soft fur. Stella lay nearby, alert but relaxed, seemingly content that her babies were safe. Emma's phone rang, her husband Ryan calling from his deployment overseas. She hadn't spoken to him in 3 days. "Em, thank God. I've been trying to reach you since the storm hit." Ryan's voice crackled through the speaker. "We're fine," Emma assured him. "But, we have some temporary house guests." She explained about Stella and the puppies, half expecting him to think she'd lost her mind. Instead, Ryan's voice softened. "You always did have the biggest heart of anyone I know. That's why I fell in love with you." "They can't stay forever," Emma said, repeating what she told the vet. "Once they're weaned and healthy." "We'll figure it out," Ryan said. "I'm just glad you're not alone during these storms anymore." After they hung up, Emma thought about Ryan's words. Was she lonely? She'd gotten so used to managing on her own during his 14-month deployment that she hardly acknowledged the isolation anymore. But having Stella's warm presence in the house, the quiet companionship of another living being who wasn't completely dependent on her, it stirred something in Emma that she'd been missing. The days fell into a new rhythm. Emma set up a larger area for the puppies using baby gates, allowing them space to explore as they grew stronger. Flicker, against all odds, began to thrive. He remained the smallest, but what he lacked in size he made up for in determination, often being the first to attempt new skills like walking on wobbly legs or play growling at his siblings. Stella proved to be extraordinarily well-behaved, almost as if she'd been trained. She was house-trained, knew basic commands, and was gentle with Theo, who had become completely enamored with her. When Emma would put Theo on a blanket for tummy time, Stella would lie beside him, letting him grab handfuls of her fur as he practiced pushing himself up. 2 weeks after that snowy night, Emma was in the kitchen preparing dinner when a strange car pulled into her driveway. Through the window, she watched a man step out. tall, well-dressed, with an expensive haircut and sunglasses despite the overcast day. Something about his confident stride as he approached her door sent a warning shiver down her spine. Stella, who had been dozing near the puppy's play area, was suddenly at full alert, a low growl rumbling in her chest. Her hackles rose, and she positioned herself between the door and where Theo was playing. The knock, when it came, was sharp and authoritative. Emma hesitated, then opened the door, keeping the security chain latched. "Can I help you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The man removed his sunglasses, revealing cold blue eyes that assessed her quickly. "I believe you have my dog," he said smoothly. "A German Shepherd female. She went missing during the storm 2 weeks ago." Emma's heart sank. Of course, Stella belonged to someone. A dog that well-behaved had to have had a home. But why then was she so malnourished? Why had she been out in the storm with her puppies? "She has puppies," Emma said, watching the man's reaction carefully. His expression flickered. Surprise, quickly masked by a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, she was pregnant when she ran off. Even better. Those puppies are quite valuable, you know. Pure German Shepherd. I can give you a finder's fee, of course." From behind Emma, Stella's growl grew louder. Emma had never heard the gentle dog make such a threatening sound. "She doesn't seem very happy to see you," Emma observed, her protective instincts flaring. The man's smile tightened. "She's always been difficult, needs a firm hand." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "I'm David Mercer. I run Mercer's Premium Protection Dogs. Perhaps you've heard of us. We train some of the finest guard dogs in the state." Emma hadn't heard of them, but something felt very wrong. Stella's reaction, the man's surprise about the puppies, his immediate mention of their value rather than concern for their welfare. "Do you have any proof that she's yours?" Emma asked, keeping her voice neutral. "Registration papers? Photos of you with her?" Irritation flashed across David's face. "I don't carry those kinds of things around with me. Look, I can see she's been well taken care of here, but she's my property. Her name is Duchess, and she's worth a considerable amount of money to my business." Duchess. Not Stella. The name felt wrong. Too formal and cold for the loving mother dog who had entrusted Emma with her puppies' lives. "I'll need to see some documentation," Emma insisted. "I've reported finding her to the local authorities and the vet. If you are her owner, you should work through them." It wasn't entirely true. She had told the vet and mentioned Stella to the sheriff when he'd stopped by to check on her after the storm, but she hadn't filed any formal reports. Still, the half-truth had the desired effect. David's cordial demeanor cracked. "Listen, lady, that dog is mine. I've invested thousands in her training. You can't just keep her because you feel like playing rescuer." "I'm not keeping anyone's dog," Emma replied, her voice firmer now. "But I'm not handing her over without proof of ownership either. Like I said, contact the sheriff's office if you want to make a formal claim." He stared at her for a long moment, then put his sunglasses back on. "You'll be hearing from me," he said, turning to leave. At his car, he paused and called back, "Check her left hip. She has a tattoo with my kennel code. MPD179. That's all the proof I need." After he drove away, Emma knelt beside Stella, who was still trembling with tension. Gently, she parted the fur on Stella's left hip. There it was, a small tattoo with the exact code David had mentioned. MPD 179. Emma sat back on her heels, her mind racing. The tattoo confirmed his claim, but everything in her rebelled against the idea of returning Stella and her puppies to that man. The way Stella had reacted, with fear and aggression, spoke volumes. "What happened to you?" Emma whispered, stroking Stella's head. "What did he do to you?" Stella whined softly and licked Emma's hand, then returned to her puppies, gathering them close as if afraid they might be taken away. Emma pulled out her phone and called Ryan again. As the phone rang, she looked at Theo, who was watching the puppies with delight, then at Stella, who had trusted her with everything precious in her world. "I think we're in trouble," she told Ryan when he answered, "and I think I'm about to do something either very brave or very stupid." The line crackled with static, but Ryan's voice came through clear. "Tell me everything. We'll figure it out together." Emma took a deep breath and explained about David Mercer, his claim on Stella, and the tattoo that confirmed his ownership. "He runs some kind of guard dog training business," she said, watching as Stella gently nudged Flicker back into the puppy pile when he tried to wander off. But Ryan, you should have seen how she reacted to him. She was terrified and aggressive at the same time. I've never seen her like that, not even when she first arrived and was protecting her puppies. Ryan was silent for a moment. "What does your gut tell you?" Emma didn't hesitate. "That she ran away for a reason, that she was mistreated. She's so gentle with Theo, so well behaved, but she's also malnourished, and she was desperate that night. I think she escaped from him." "Did you check if this guy's business is legitimate?" Ryan asked. "Not yet. He just left a few minutes ago." "Do that first," Ryan suggested, "and call Sheriff Morris. Tell him everything, including your concerns. Jim's known us since we moved there. He'll listen." After hanging up, Emma placed Theo in his playpen with some toys and sat down at her laptop. A quick internet search for Mercer's premium protection dogs brought up a professional-looking website showcasing German Shepherds, Rottweilers, and Belgian Malinois posed in aggressive stances. The site advertised elite protection dogs for discerning clients and specialized training techniques that guarantee results. There were several testimonials from wealthy clients praising the extraordinary obedience and protective instincts of their Mercer-trained dogs. The prices listed made Emma's eyes widen, starting at $15,000 for a basic protection-trained adult dog and up to $50,000 for elite executive protection animals. Emma found a photo gallery and scrolled through dozens of images until she gasped, stopping on a picture of Stella, or Duchess, as she was called there. The caption read, "Duchess, our prize-breeding female. Imported German bloodlines, advanced protection training. Puppies available for reservation, inquire for pricing." Below Stella's photo was a disturbing promotional video. It showed her snarling and lunging at a trainer wearing a protective suit, her demeanor completely different from the gentle dog currently curled around her puppies in Emma's living room. In the video, David Mercer stood nearby with a remote control in his hand, and Emma noticed with horror that Stella was wearing what appeared to be a shock collar. "Oh, Stella," she whispered, feeling sick. Emma dug deeper, searching for reviews and comments about Mercer's business. Most were positive, but she found a few concerning posts on dog training forums where professional trainers criticized Mercer's methods as outdated and unnecessarily harsh. One comment from a former client claimed their dog had developed severe anxiety after Mercer's training program. The comment had received a threatening response from someone defending Mercer, and the original post was later deleted. Most disturbing was a year-old news article about an investigation into alleged animal cruelty at an unnamed local protection dog facility. The investigation had apparently been dropped due to insufficient evidence, but reading between the lines, Emma strongly suspected it had been Mercer's operation. Her research was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Unlike Mercer's sharp, demanding rap, this was gentle and hesitant. Stella lifted her head, but showed no signs of aggression. Emma opened the door to find a young woman with worried eyes and nervous hands that couldn't seem to stay still. She was probably in her early 20s, dressed in worn jeans and a thick winter coat that had seen better days. "Are you the lady who found a German shepherd? With puppies?" she asked in a rush, her eyes darting past Emma to scan the living room behind her. Emma's protective instincts flared again. "Who's asking?" "My name is Zoe Miller. I used to work for David Mercer." The young woman swallowed hard. "And I need to warn you about him." Emma studied her for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in." Once inside, Zoe knelt down several feet from Stella, not approaching but allowing the dog to see her. "Hey, Duchess," she said softly, "remember me?" Stella's tail thumped against the floor, not the fearful reaction she'd had to Mercer. She didn't move from her puppies, but her body language was relaxed, even welcoming. "You really do know her," Emma said. Zoe nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I was a kennel assistant at Mercer's facility for 8 months. I quit 3 weeks ago, right after I helped her escape." Emma sat down abruptly on the nearest chair. "You helped her escape? Why?" Zoe's hands twisted together in her lap. "Because he was going to put her down after she had the puppies. Said she was getting too old for breeding and not aggressive enough anymore for the protection work." She looked up at Emma, her face twisted with anger and grief. "She's only 4 years old, but he goes through dogs like they're disposable. If they don't perform exactly how he wants, or if they show any softness, he discards them." "How did you find me?" Emma asked, her mind racing. "Small town, word gets around. I overheard at the grocery store that someone had taken in a German shepherd with puppies during the big storm. I knew it had to be Duchess." Zoe looked at the puppies, now playfully tumbling over each other. "I'm so glad they all made it. I was so worried when the storm hit right after I let her out. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't take her myself. I live with 3 roommates in a no-pets apartment. So you just opened the gate and let her go? In winter? While she was pregnant?" Zoe flinched at Emma's tone. "I know how it sounds, but you don't understand what he was planning to do to her. And I did more than just let her go. I'd been saving up dog food for weeks, hiding it in an old shed about a mile from Mercer's property. I put out blankets, water. I thought it would give her time until I could find someone to help. Then the storm came early and—" She trailed off, guilt evident in her expression. Emma softened slightly. "She found us. Somehow, she found exactly the right house. She's always been smart," Zoe said with a sad smile. "Smartest dog in his whole program. That was part of the problem. She could tell when he was being cruel for no reason. The other dogs just obeyed blindly, but she understood too much." A chill ran down Emma's spine. "He'll be back, won't he?" "He already came by earlier today demanding her return." Zoe nodded grimly. "He will. Those puppies are worth thousands to him, and he doesn't like losing what he considers his property." She hesitated. "There's something else you should know. Mercer has connections, with the police, with local officials. Money talks, and he has plenty of it. That's how he's avoided consequences for his training methods all these years." As if on cue, Emma's phone rang. It was Sheriff Morris. "Emma?" "Jim Morris here. Got an interesting call today from a businessman named David Mercer. Says you've got his dog?" Emma's heart sank. She put the call on speaker so Zoe could hear. "Sheriff, that's not the whole story. The dog showed up at my door during the storm with 4 newborn puppies. She was starving and terrified. Well, he's got documentation proving ownership," the sheriff said, his tone uncomfortably official. registration papers, photos, even says she's got some kind of identifying tattoo. That true? Yes, but then I'm afraid the law's pretty clear on this, Emma. It's his property. Emma caught Zoe's eye, seeing her resigned nod. This was exactly what she'd been warning about. Jim, you've known me and Ryan for years, Emma said, fighting to keep her voice steady. This dog was neglected, possibly abused. She's emaciated, and she's nursing puppies. I have concerns about returning her to this man. The sheriff sighed. Look, Emma, I understand you've gotten attached. That's natural. But Mr. Mercer runs a respected business. He explained that the dog escaped while pregnant, and he's been searching for her since. Says she's a valuable breeding animal. An animal. That's how he sees her, Emma said bitterly. Not as a living creature. That's not for me to judge, Sheriff Morris replied, sounding uncomfortable. He's agreed to give you until tomorrow morning to get the dog and her puppies ready for transport. He'll be at your place at 9 a.m., and he's asked that I accompany him to avoid any misunderstandings. After the call ended, Emma and Zoe sat in stunned silence. I'm so sorry, Zoe whispered eventually. I never meant to bring this trouble to your door. I just wanted to save her. Emma watched as Theo, who had been quietly playing in his playpen, began to fuss. She lifted him out and sat on the floor near Stella, who immediately inched closer until her warm body pressed against Emma's side. Theo reached out, patting Stella's head with delighted babbles. You didn't bring this trouble, Emma said finally. She chose to come here. She chose us. She looked at Zoe with newfound determination. And I'm choosing her too. We're not giving her back to that man. But how? The sheriff might be on Mercer's side, but there are higher authorities. Emma reached for her phone again. My college roommate works for the State Animal Welfare Division now, and I'm pretty sure animal cruelty investigations trump local property disputes. As she dialed, another plan was forming in Emma's mind. Zoe, would you be willing to testify about what you saw at Mercer's facility? About his training methods, the conditions, everything? Zoe paled, but nodded. He'll ruin me professionally. I'll never work with animals again if he has his way, but yes. For Stella, yes, I would. Good, because I have less than 24 hours to gather enough evidence to stop Mercer, and I need all the help I can get. What followed was a night unlike any Emma had experienced. Her call to Melissa at the State Animal Welfare Division had set several wheels in motion. By midnight, Emma's quiet living room had transformed into an impromptu headquarters for what Melissa called Operation Shepherd Rescue. Dr. Abrams arrived first, bringing detailed medical records documenting Stella's condition when he'd first examined her. The malnutrition, the scarring around her neck from what he now identified as likely shock collar burns, and evidence of previous injuries consistent with harsh training methods. Next came Melissa herself, having driven 3 hours from the state capitol, bringing with her 2 investigators and a stack of paperwork that included emergency custody orders for the dogs. They photographed Stella and the puppies, documented the tattoo, and took detailed statements from both Emma and Zoe. Mercer's been on our radar for years, Melissa explained as they worked. But he's careful, and as your young friend mentioned, he has connections. We've never been able to build a strong enough case to shut him down. By 3 a.m., they had also connected via video conference with Ryan, who had pulled strings through military channels to get statements from 3 former clients of Mercer's who had complained about his methods but had been silenced through legal threats. As dawn broke, Emma, bleary-eyed from lack of sleep but running on adrenaline and purpose, sat beside Stella on the floor, gently stroking her head. "So much fuss over you," she murmured. "Who would have thought one dog could cause such a commotion?" Stella looked up at her with those intelligent amber eyes that seemed to understand everything. "We've done all we can for now," Melissa told Emma as the team prepared to leave. "I've got the emergency custody order, which will prevent him from taking the dogs today. But be prepared. This is just the first skirmish. He'll fight back with lawyers and money." "Let him," Emma said quietly, watching as Theo slept peacefully in his playpen, one hand stretched out toward where the puppies nestled against their mother. Some things are worth fighting for. After everyone left, Emma finally allowed herself a few hours of sleep on the couch near Stella and her puppies. She woke to the sound of a car in the driveway and checked her watch. 8:45 a.m. Mercer was early. She peered out the window and felt a surge of relief when she saw not Mercer's expensive car, but Ryan's old pickup truck. For a moment, she thought she was hallucinating from exhaustion. But then the driver's door opened, and there he was, her husband, in his civilian clothes rather than his uniform, looking tired but determined as he strode toward the house. Emma flung open the door and flew into his arms. "Ryan, how are you here? Your deployment—" "Emergency family leave," he explained, holding her tight. "Pulled every string I could. My commanding officer owed me a favor, and when I explained what was happening..." He looked over her shoulder into the house. "So, where's this dog that's caused such a commotion?" Emma led him inside, where Stella watched them cautiously until Ryan knelt down and offered his hand for her to sniff. After a moment's hesitation, she gave his fingers a gentle lick, her tail wagging tentatively. "Well, aren't you something special?" Ryan said softly. "And these must be your babies." He looked up at Emma, his expression serious. "You were right to call me. From what you've told me about this Mercer character, I wanted to be here." The sound of another vehicle pulling into the driveway interrupted their reunion. Through the window, Emma saw Mercer's sleek black SUV, followed by Sheriff Morris's patrol car. "Here we go," she whispered, feeling Ryan's reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We've got this," he said. "Together." But as they watched, a third vehicle pulled in. Melissa's state government car, with official seals on the doors. And behind her came two more vehicles, a local news van and Dr. Abrams' truck. Emma couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. "I think our reinforcements have arrived." The confrontation that unfolded on Emma's front porch would later become something of a local legend. David Mercer, impeccably dressed and radiating cold fury, was met not by a vulnerable woman he could intimidate, but by a united front of determined faces. Sheriff Morris looked distinctly uncomfortable as Melissa presented him with the emergency custody order for the dogs. The news reporter, a sharp-eyed woman who introduced herself as Diane Powell from Channel 8 News, captured everything on camera, including Mercer's furious reaction. "This is absurd," he shouted, his carefully cultivated professional demeanor cracking. "That animal is my property. I have the papers right here." "Mr. Mercer," Melissa said calmly, "ownership doesn't confer the right to mistreat an animal. We have evidence suggesting violations of state animal cruelty statutes at your facility. This emergency order gives the state temporary custody of the dog known as Duchess, and her offspring pending a full investigation." "What evidence? The word of that thief?" He pointed at Zoe, who had arrived moments before, and was standing slightly behind Emma. "She stole my dog. She should be arrested." Sheriff Morris shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Mercer, if you want to press charges, you're damn right I want to press charges. Against her, against this woman." He gestured furiously at Emma. "Against all of them." "That might not be in your best interest," Ryan said quietly, stepping forward. His calm, authoritative presence seemed to fill the porch. "Because then, Everything would come out in court. Everything. Diane Powell moved closer with her microphone. Mr. Mercer, Channel 8 has received multiple reports about your training methods over the years. Would you care to comment on allegations that you use electric shock collars and physical discipline on your dogs? Mercer's face contorted with rage. This is a setup. You're all conspiring against me. Dr. Abrams spoke up, his gentle voice somehow cutting through Mercer's shouting. I've treated this dog, sir. I've documented evidence of long-term malnutrition and injuries consistent with abusive training. As a licensed veterinarian, I'm obligated to report such findings. For a moment, it seemed Mercer might physically lash out. His hands clenched into fists, and he took a step toward Dr. Abrams. Ryan smoothly interposed himself, saying nothing but radiating quiet readiness. The standoff was broken by a soft sound from inside the house. Stella's whine as she watched the confrontation through the screen door, her puppies safely behind her. Something in Mercer's expression changed when he saw her. Not softening, but calculating. Fine, he said abruptly. Keep the damn dog. She's past her prime anyway, but the puppies are valuable stock. They're coming with me. I'm afraid not, Melissa said firmly. The custody order covers all 5 animals. None of them will be released to you pending the investigation's conclusion. You think you've won, Mercer said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper as he looked at Emma. But this isn't over. Not by a long shot. I have friends you couldn't imagine. Connections you couldn't dream of. One way or another, I'll get what's mine. With that, he turned and stalked back to his car, slamming the door so hard the vehicle shook before speeding away, gravel spraying from his tires. In the silence that followed, Sheriff Morris removed his hat and rubbed his balding head. Well, I can't say that went how I expected. He looked at Emma apologetically. Emma, Ryan, I'm sorry about all this. Mercer made it sound straightforward on the phone. They usually do, Sheriff, Melissa said, not unkindly. Men like that count on their charm and position to get what they want without questions. The sheriff nodded grimly. I'll be looking into some things on my end. Seems like there might be complaints about Mercer that never made it to my desk somehow. He glanced meaningfully at his deputy, who looked away quickly. As the crowd on the porch dispersed, Emma stood with Ryan, watching as Diane Powell gave a final report to her camera before packing up. So, what happens now? Ryan asked Melissa, who was gathering her paperwork. Now we build our case, she said. But I won't lie to you, it won't be easy. Men like Mercer don't go down without a fight, and they usually have expensive lawyers. The emergency custody only lasts for 30 days. After that, we'll need to prove our allegations in court. What are the chances? Emma asked, feeling Ryan's arm tighten around her shoulder. Melissa hesitated. With Zoe's testimony, the medical evidence, and whatever else we can uncover, I'd say 50-50. She smiled slightly. Better odds than Stella had when she showed up at your door in that snowstorm. After everyone had gone, Emma, Ryan, and Theo sat on the living room floor with Stella and her puppies. Luna, the most adventurous of the litter, had claimed Ryan's lap within minutes of meeting him. Flicker, still the smallest but growing stronger every day, nestled contentedly in the crook of Emma's arm. So, Ryan said, gently scratching behind Luna's ears, when were you going to tell me you wanted a dog? Emma laughed, the first real laugh in what felt like days. I didn't know I did until she showed up at our door. Ryan watched as Theo crawled over to Ash and Ember, giggling as they licked his face. He's going to be heartbroken if they have to leave. The unspoken question hung in the air between them. Emma met her husband's eyes. What if they didn't have to? I mean, we couldn't keep all of them, obviously, but what if Stella stayed? And maybe one of the puppies? Ryan pretended to consider it seriously, but his twitching lips gave him away. Well, the yard would need a fence, and we'd have to find a good trainer, a kind one, to help with any issues from her past. You're not saying no, Emma observed, hope rising in her chest. I'm saying, Ryan replied, reaching out to take her hand, that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose, and it seems like Stella already chose us. Emma thought about the long road ahead, the legal battle with Mercer, the healing Stella would need, the challenges of raising puppies alongside a growing baby. But looking at the scene before her, her son laughing with the puppies, her husband already smitten with Luna, and Stella watching over them all with those intelligent amber eyes, she knew some battles were worth fighting, no matter the odds. So, we're doing this, she asked Ryan, squeezing his hand. He leaned over to kiss her gently. We're doing this. All of us, together. Outside, fresh snow began to fall, coating the world in pristine white, covering the tire tracks and footprints from the morning's confrontation. But this time, Emma felt only peace watching it through the window. The storm that had brought Stella to their door had changed all their lives forever, creating connections none of them could have imagined. And somewhere in the house, perhaps in the walls or under the floorboards, Emma was certain she could hear the sound of fate laughing, gentle and kind, at the beautiful complexity of it all. 3 months later, spring had transformed Emma's little corner of the world. The snow had melted, giving way to tender green shoots and the first brave wildflowers. In the newly fenced backyard, Stella raced in joyful circles with Flicker, now a gangly 4-month-old puppy with ears too big for his head and boundless energy. They had decided to keep him, the runt who had fought so hard to live that first night, while finding loving homes for his siblings. Luna had gone home with Dr. Abrams, whose elderly German shepherd had passed away the previous year. The kindly vet had fallen in love with the adventurous puppy with the crescent moon mark on her chest, and she now accompanied him on his rounds, charming patients and their owners alike. Ash had been adopted by Melissa, a fitting home for the serious, watchful puppy who seemed to have inherited his mother's intelligence and calm assessment of the world around him. And Ember, the fiery one with her mother's amber eyes, had found an unexpected home with Sheriff Morris and his wife, whose children had recently left for college, leaving their house feeling too empty and quiet. The sheriff had shown up at Emma's door 2 weeks after the confrontation with Mercer, hat in hand, asking tentatively if any of the puppies still needed homes. His wife had fallen in love with Ember's photo from the news footage, he explained sheepishly. Besides, he'd added, might help remind me what I'm supposed to be protecting in this town. Emma stood at the kitchen window now, watching as Ryan knelt in the newly tilled garden, showing Theo how to pat soil around a tomato seedling. At 14 months, Theo was walking unsteadily and babbling constantly, one of his first recognizable words being Stell for Stella. The German shepherd never strayed far from him when they were outside, her protective instinct now channeled into gentle vigilance rather than the aggressive defense Mercer had tried to train into her. The past 3 months hadn't been without challenges. The legal battle with Mercer had grown ugly quickly, with his expensive attorneys filing motions and countercharges, trying to overwhelm the state's case with paperwork and procedural delays. But Melissa had been relentless, and public opinion had turned decisively against Mercer after Channel 8's investigation into his business practices aired. 3 more former employees had come forward, bolstering Zoe's testimony about the conditions at his facility. Most damaging of all had been the testimony from a former client, a wealthy businessman who had returned his Mercer-trained protection dog after it bit his child. In his deposition, he described how Mercer had insisted the dog be euthanized rather than rehabilitated, claiming it was defective merchandise. The businessman had refused, instead placing the dog with a renowned rehabilitation specialist who documented the animal's recovery and the abusive training methods that had caused its aggression. 2 weeks ago, Melissa had called with the news. The judge had granted permanent custody of Stella and her puppies to the state, which in turn had approved their adoption by their new families. Mercer's legal avenues were exhausted. Stella was officially, legally theirs. That same day, the state had suspended Mercer's business license pending a full investigation of his facility. Rumors around town suggested he was preparing to leave the state, possibly even the country, to escape mounting legal troubles. Emma's phone buzzed on the counter, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from Zoe, who had become a regular visitor and occasional babysitter for Theo. "You won't believe who just walked into the shelter. Call me." Zoe had found her calling after the Mercer ordeal, taking a job at the county animal shelter and enrolling in online courses in animal behavior. She was determined to become a trainer specializing in rehabilitation of traumatized dogs, the opposite of everything Mercer stood for. Intrigued, Emma called her immediately. "You're never going to believe this," Zoe said without preamble when she answered. "Remember how we always wondered where Stella came from before Mercer got her? Well, I think I just met her original owner." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "What? How?" "This older gentleman came in looking to adopt a dog, said his German Shepherd disappeared 3 years ago, and he'd finally decided it was time to open his heart to another dog. When I was taking his information for the application, I noticed his address. He lives about 50 miles from Mercer's facility out in farm country. That doesn't necessarily mean—" "Wait, I'm not finished," Zoe interrupted excitedly. "I was making small talk, asking about his previous dog, and he showed me a picture on his phone. Emma, it's Stella. A younger version, but it's definitely her. Same distinctive amber eyes, same white patch on her chest. He called her Sadie." Emma sank into a kitchen chair. "Sadie," she whispered. The name felt right somehow, softer and more fitting than either Duchess or Stella. "His name is Frank Pearson. He's in his 70s, a retired high school principal. He said Sadie disappeared from his farm 3 years ago. He searched for months but never found her. He always suspected she was stolen because she was so well trained and beautiful, but he couldn't prove anything." 3 years ago, Emma murmured. "That's when Mercer's website first showed pictures of Duchess." "Exactly. I didn't say anything to him yet. I wanted to talk to you first." But Emma, he was heartbroken talking about her. Said she was the gentlest, smartest dog he'd ever known. He raised her from a puppy. Emma looked out at the yard again, where Stella, or Sadie, was now lying patiently beside Theo as he patted her head with his small hands, Ryan watching them both with a smile. "What should we do?" she asked Zoe. "It's been 3 years. We've just gone through all this to keep her. And she's bonded with Theo, with all of us." Zoe was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she admitted. "Legally, she's yours now. But morally, I thought you'd want to know." "You were right to tell me," Emma said. "Can you give me his number?" "I need to talk to Ryan first. But if this man is really her original owner, he deserves to know she's alive and safe, at the very least." That evening, after Theo was asleep and Stella and Flicker were dozing on their beds in the living room, Emma told Ryan about Zoe's discovery. Ryan listened thoughtfully, his brow furrowed. "What are you thinking?" he asked when she finished. Emma sighed, leaning against his shoulder on the couch. "I don't know. Part of me is afraid of losing her after everything we've been through. But another part of me keeps thinking about this man who loved her first, who's been missing her for 3 years." Ryan nodded slowly, I understand. What if we invited him to meet with us? No promises, no decisions right away. Just a chance for him to see her and for us to see them together. The next day, Emma called Frank Pearson. His voice was warm and gentle, with the measured cadence of someone who had spent decades in education. When she explained who she was and mentioned Stella, the catch in his breath was audible. She's alive? My Sadie is alive? The emotion in his voice brought tears to Emma's eyes. Yes, she's alive and safe, Emma assured him. It's a long, complicated story, but we'd like to meet with you if you're willing. They arranged for Frank to visit the following weekend. As the day approached, Emma found herself increasingly anxious. What if Stella recognized him immediately and clearly wanted to go with him? What if the meeting reopened trauma from her time with Mercer? What would be the right thing to do for everyone involved? The morning of Frank's visit, Emma took extra care brushing Stella's coat until it gleamed in the spring sunshine. Someone special is coming to see you today, she told the dog, who wagged her tail and licked Emma's hand as if to say, "Don't worry so much." Frank arrived precisely at the agreed time, driving a modest, older model pickup truck. He was tall and slightly stooped, with a full head of silver hair and kind blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He moved with the careful deliberation of someone managing arthritis but refused Ryan's offer of help as he climbed the porch steps. Emma had asked Zoe to be present, both as someone Stella trusted and as a neutral party. She stood now in the living room, where they had decided the meeting should take place, rather than overwhelming Stella with a stranger in her yard. "Thank you for inviting me," Frank said, his voice steady, though his hands trembled slightly. "I understand she's your dog now, legally and in every way that matters. I needed to see her, to know she's okay." "We understand," Ryan said, shaking his hand. "She means a lot to us, too." "Where is she?" Frank asked, looking around the living room. "In the backyard with our son and the puppy," Emma explained. "We thought it might be easier if we bring her in after you're settled." They sat down, and Emma offered Frank a glass of lemonade, which he accepted gratefully. They made small talk for a few minutes about the drive over and the pleasant spring weather, but it was clear Frank was anxious to see Stella. Finally, Ryan nodded to Emma. "I'll go get her," he said. When Ryan returned with Stella on her leash, the room fell completely silent. Frank went very still in his chair, his eyes filling with tears. "Sadie," he whispered. Stella stopped in the doorway, her head tilted to one side. She stared at Frank intently, her nose working as she took in his scent from across the room. For a heart-stopping moment she didn't move. Then her tail began to wag. Slowly at first, then with gathering speed until her whole body was wiggling with excitement. She whined, a high, plaintive sound, and looked up at Ryan as if asking permission. "It's okay, girl," Ryan said softly, unclipping her leash. Stella bounded across the room and nearly knocked Frank out of his chair, covering his face with frantic licks, her body trembling with joy. Frank wrapped his arms around her neck, burying his face in her fur, his shoulders shaking. "Oh, my good girl," he kept saying. "My sweet, good girl. I thought I'd never see you again." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Zoe was openly sobbing, and Emma felt Ryan's arm go around her shoulders, steadying her. When Frank finally composed himself, wiping his eyes with a handkerchief, Stella settled at his feet, her head resting on his shoe, refusing to break contact. "She remembers," he said wonderingly. "After all this time?" "Dogs never forget the people who love them," Zoe said softly. Frank stroked Stella's head, his gnarled fingers gentle on her fur. "When she disappeared, I thought my heart would break. I'd had her since she was 8 weeks old. My wife had just passed away, and Sadie was, well, she saved me, really. Gave me a reason to get up every morning. Emma and Ryan exchanged pained glances. This was exactly what they'd feared, that Frank's bond with Stella would be as strong as theirs, making any decision impossible without someone getting hurt. "How did you find her?" Frank asked, looking up at them. Over lemonade and the cookies Emma had baked that morning, they told him the whole story. The snowy night Stella had appeared at their door, the puppies, Mercer's claim and threat, the discovery of his abusive business, and the legal battle that had followed. Frank listened intently, his face darkening with anger when they described Mercer's treatment of Duchess. "I always suspected she was stolen," he said when they finished. "She never would have run away. Not Sadie, she was always right by my side." He looked down at the dog, who hadn't moved from her position at his feet. "I reported her missing, put up flyers, contacted every shelter within 100 miles, but after a while, people started suggesting I should accept she was gone. Hit by a car, taken by coyotes, something like that." "How do you think Mercer got her?" Ryan asked. Frank's expression hardened. "There was a man who came around a few times that summer, said he was scouting for hunting land to lease. He admired Sadie, asked a lot of questions about her training, her bloodlines. I didn't think much of it at the time." He shook his head. "I've gone over it 1,000 times in my mind, wondering if he took her or if it was just a coincidence." "Did you recognize Mercer when his picture was in the news?" Emma asked. "No, it wasn't him. This was a younger fellow, rough-looking. Could have been working for him, I suppose." They talked for another hour, with Frank sharing stories about Sadie as a puppy and a young dog, how she used to herd his neighbor's chickens back into their yard when they escaped, how she would bring him his slippers every evening without being asked, how she once pulled his young grandson away from a copperhead snake in the garden. As he talked, Emma found herself looking at Stella in a new light, seeing her not just as the dog who had come to them in the storm, but as a being with a whole history and life before Mercer, before them. A life filled with love and trust that had been violently interrupted. Eventually, the conversation reached its inevitable crossroads. "Mr. Pearson," Emma began tentatively. "Frank, please," he said with a small smile. "Frank, we invited you here because we believed you had a right to know what happened to Sadie. But I have to be honest, we're very attached to her. She's become part of our family." She glanced at Stella, who was now looking between her and Frank as if trying to understand the undercurrents in their conversation. Frank nodded slowly. "I can see that, and I can see she's happy here." His gaze moved to the window, where they could see Theo playing in the yard with Flicker under Zoe's supervision. "You have a beautiful family." "We were hoping," Ryan said carefully, "that maybe we could find a way for everyone to remain in her life. We don't want to lose her, but we also don't want to keep her from someone who clearly loves her so much." Frank was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking Stella's ears. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "When I came here today, I didn't know what to expect. Part of me hoped, well, it doesn't matter now. What matters is what's best for Sadie." He looked around their home, taking in the dog beds in the corner, the toys scattered on the floor, the baby gate with the small door they'd installed so Stella could move freely between rooms while keeping Theo contained. "This is a good home," he said finally. "She's happy here. She has another dog for company, a child to protect, and after what she's been through, more upheaval wouldn't be fair to her." Emma felt her throat tighten. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying," Frank continued, "that I think she should stay with you, where she's safe and loved." He smiled, though his eyes were sad. It doesn't mean I don't miss her every day, but at my age, living alone on that big farm, it might not be what's best for her anymore. The relief Emma felt was immediately followed by guilt. "We don't want to take her from you," she said. "Maybe we could work out visits? Or you could come stay with us sometimes." Frank's expression brightened slightly. "I'd like that, if you're sure it wouldn't be an imposition." "Not at all," Ryan assured him. "In fact, we could probably use help with the dogs when the baby comes." Frank raised his eyebrows. "Another little one on the way?" Emma nodded, her hand going unconsciously to her stomach. "Just found out last week. Theo will be a big brother in the fall." "Well, now," Frank said, his smile becoming more genuine. "That's wonderful news. Sadie's always been good with children." They talked for a while longer, making plans for Frank to visit again soon. Before he left, he spent time in the backyard with Stella, Flicker, and Theo, throwing balls and watching the dogs run with a bittersweet smile. As he prepared to leave, Frank reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn leather collar with a small brass tag. "This was hers," he said, holding it out to Emma. "Her original name tag. I kept it, all this time." Emma took it, running her fingers over the tag where Sadie was engraved above Frank's phone number. "Thank you for trusting us with her," she said softly. Frank nodded, then knelt despite his arthritic knees to embrace Stella one more time. "You be a good girl," he told her, his voice breaking slightly. "These are good people. They'll take care of you." As they watched Frank's truck disappear down the driveway, Ryan put his arm around Emma's shoulders. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, blinking back tears. "I think we just gained a grandfather for our children," she said with a small smile. "And a loving uncle for Stella." "Sadie," Ryan corrected gently. "Sadie," Emma agreed, looking down at the dog who was watching the road where Frank's truck had disappeared. She slipped the old collar around Sadie's neck alongside her newer one. "Is that okay, girl? To have your old name back?" Sadie looked up at her with those intelligent amber eyes and gave a single decisive woof, as if to say, "I'm still me, whatever you call me." 6 months later. The autumn air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke, as Emma rocked on the porch swing, her newborn daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. Theo, now a rambunctious, almost 2-year-old, was helping Ryan and Frank rake leaves in the yard. Helping, meaning he was gleefully jumping into every pile they created, sending leaves flying again. Sadie lay at Emma's feet, her head on her paws, occasionally lifting her eyes to check on the baby. She had appointed herself guardian of little Sarah from the moment they'd brought her home from the hospital 2 weeks ago, just as she had with Theo. Flicker, now a gangling adolescent but still small for his age, raced around the yard with Theo, his youthful energy a stark contrast to his mother's dignified watchfulness. On the coffee table beside Emma sat that morning's newspaper, folded open to a small article that had caught Ryan's eye at breakfast. Former dog trainer facing federal charges. The piece detailed how David Mercer had been arrested while trying to cross the Canadian border with falsified documents. The investigation sparked by Sadie's case had expanded, uncovering not only extensive animal cruelty, but also tax evasion, fraud, and conspiracy charges related to his business. He was now facing years in prison. It felt like the final chapter in a story that had begun on that snowy night almost a year ago. Justice, long delayed but finally served. Frank had become a regular presence in their lives, visiting at least once a week and occasionally staying in their guest room. He had sold his farm, finding it too much to manage alone, and moved into a small house in town just 10 minutes away. He'd adopted an older German Shepherd mix from the shelter where Zoe worked, not to replace Sadie, he'd explained, but to give another deserving dog a loving home. Emma watched as he showed Theo how to hold the rake, his patience endless with the energetic toddler. Despite his initial sadness at leaving Sadie with them, Frank had found a new place in their expanding family circle, the wise, gentle grandfather figure none of them had realized they needed. Zoe, too, had become like family, pursuing her studies in animal behavior while working at the shelter. She had found her purpose in rehabilitating dogs with troubled pasts, helping them overcome their trauma just as Sadie had. The connections that had formed that night, between a desperate mother dog and a family who opened their door, between a lonely old man and the young family who now embraced him, between a struggling young woman and her newfound purpose, had created something beautiful and unexpected. A family bound not by blood but by choice, by compassion, by the recognition of something valuable in each other. Sarah stirred in Emma's arms, making tiny baby sounds as she woke. Sadie immediately sat up, alert and concerned, until Emma assured her, "It's okay, girl. She's just hungry." As if understanding, Sadie relaxed but stayed close, her amber eyes watching over them both. Emma looked out at her family in the yard, Ryan and Frank teaching Theo about the world, Flicker racing joyfully through the fallen leaves, and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. The door that had opened on that snowy night had never really closed. Instead, it had widened, making room for more love, more connections, more joy than any of them could have imagined. And at the center of it all was Sadie, once lost, once abused, but always, at her core, a being of pure love and loyalty who had found her way home not once, but twice. As the autumn sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, Emma thought about how life's most difficult moments, those storms that shake us to our foundations, sometimes carry within them the seeds of our greatest blessings. All we have to do is open the door and let them in. That evening, as the temperature dropped and the first hints of winter crept into the autumn air, they gathered around the fireplace in the living room. Ryan had built a crackling fire that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Theo, exhausted from his leaf-jumping adventures, had fallen asleep on the thick rug, one arm flung over Flicker, who slept pressed against him. Their rhythmic breathing created a peaceful backdrop to the adult conversation. Frank sat in what had become his armchair, a quilt Emma had made draped over his knees, his weathered hands cradling a mug of spiced cider. His eyes crinkled with laughter as Ryan recounted Theo's antics in the leaf piles. "Reminds me of my Jonathan at that age," Frank said softly, referring to his son who now lived across the country with his own family. Same boundless energy, same joy in the simplest things. Emma sat nearby on the couch, Sarah sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside her. She reached out to gently rock it when the baby stirred, the motion as natural to her now as breathing. Sadie lay on her bed near the fire, but her eyes remained fixed on the bassinet, ever vigilant. "Did I ever tell you about the night Sadie alerted me to the barn fire?" Frank asked, his gaze drifting to the German Shepherd. "Must have been about 5 years ago now." They shook their heads, settling in for one of Frank's stories. His tales of life on the farm with Sadie had become a cherished part of their evenings together. "It was the middle of winter, bitter cold, much like the night she found your door," he said, nodding to Emma. "I'd fallen asleep in my chair after dinner with the television on. Sadie had been restless all evening, pacing and whining, but I'd put it down to the storm brewing outside." He paused to take a sip of his cider, his eyes distant with memory. "Around midnight, she started barking like I'd never heard before. Not aggressive, but insistent, urgent. When I didn't respond quickly enough, she actually tugged at my sleeve with her teeth, pulling me toward the back door. The moment I opened it, I could smell the smoke. Lightning had struck the old oak next to the barn, and sparks had caught in the hay storage. Frank shook his head in wonder, even years later. If she hadn't alerted me when she did, I'd have lost the whole structure and probably the animals inside. As it was, we managed to get the horses out and contain the fire to just one section of the building. He looked at Sadie with profound affection. She stayed right by my side the whole time, helping to herd the frightened horses to the paddock, then guiding the firefighters to where the blaze was worst. Emma watched Sadie as Frank spoke, seeing how the dog's ears perked up at the sound of her name in his story, how her intelligent eyes seemed to hold the memory of that night. "She's always had that gift," Emma said softly, "knowing when she's needed and exactly what to do." Ryan reached over and took Emma's hand, squeezing it gently. "Like finding us in that snowstorm," he said. "Of all the houses on this road, she came to ours. Because she knew," Frank said with certainty. "Dogs have a sense about people, who needs them, who will love them. Sadie's sense has always been stronger than most." The fire popped and hissed as a log settled, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind had picked up, rustling the remaining leaves on the trees and promising colder days ahead. But inside, wrapped in warmth and companionship, it felt as though they existed in a perfect moment, suspended in time. "I got a call today," Zoe said, breaking the comfortable silence. She had arrived after dinner, bringing a pumpkin pie and the latest updates from the shelter. "From that journalist who covered Sadie's story, Diane Powell?" "Oh?" Emma looked up with interest. "What did she want?" "She's doing a follow-up piece," Zoe explained, curling her legs beneath her on the love seat. "About the impact of Sadie's case on animal welfare in the region. Apparently, reports of suspected abuse have tripled since the story broke, and the county's approved funding for a new animal control officer position focused specifically on welfare checks and investigations." "That's wonderful," Emma said, genuinely pleased. The thought that other animals might be spared what Sadie had endured at Mercer's hands because of increased awareness brought her a deep sense of satisfaction. "She wants to interview all of us," Zoe continued, "to show how one dog brought about so much change, not just in the legal system but in people's lives too." She gestured around the room, encompassing all of them. "I mean, look at us. A year ago, none of us knew each other. Now, we're family," Frank completed for her when she trailed off, seemingly searching for the right word. "We're family." There was a certainty in his voice that brooked no argument. The word settled over them like a blessing. Emma felt tears prick at her eyes, hormone-fueled but no less genuine for that. Ryan's arm tightened around her shoulders, and Zoe smiled, looking younger and more carefree than she had when they'd first met her, burdened by the weight of her secret mission to save Sadie. Outside, an early snow began to fall, just a few flakes at first, then more steadily, glittering in the porch light. It felt like a sign, a completion of the circle that had begun with that first storm. Sarah stirred in her bassinet, making the small mewling sounds that signaled hunger. As Emma reached for her, Sadie rose from her bed and padded over, sitting attentively beside them as Emma settled the baby at her breast. The dog's amber eyes, wise and gentle, met Emma's, and a silent understanding passed between them. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the family they had built together, Emma felt a sense of completion she hadn't known was missing from her life until now. It wasn't just about having Ryan back from deployment, or the joy of their children, precious as those were. It was about the expanded circle of love that had grown from one desperate act of compassion on a winter night, opening a door to a mother in need. Sadie rested her head lightly on Emma's knee as she nursed Sarah, a gesture of solidarity between mothers. The simple weight of it felt like an anchor, grounding Emma in the knowledge that some bonds transcend language, transcend species. They simply are, fundamental and unbreakable. Frank watched them from his armchair, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You know," he said softly, "when Lisa, my wife, was dying, she told me to keep my heart open, that love would find its way back to me somehow." He smiled, the firelight catching the silver in his hair. "I don't think this is what she had in mind, but she would have loved all of this. Especially you," he added, his gaze shifting to Sadie. The wind picked up outside, driving the snow against the windows, but inside their circle of light and warmth, there was only peace. The world beyond could wait with its challenges and complications. For now, there was just this: a family gathered, a fire burning, a baby nursing, a dog watching over them all with eyes that had seen darkness but now reflected only love. As the clock on the mantel chimed 9, Frank rose stiffly from his chair. "I should be heading home," he said, though without much conviction. The snow was falling more heavily now, the wind howling around the eaves. "Nonsense," Ryan said firmly. "You're staying in the guest room tonight. That's not weather to be driving in." The relief in Frank's expression was evident, though he made a token protest about not wanting to impose. But they all knew the truth. He belonged here as much as any of them. Later, after Frank had settled into the guest room and Zoe had headed home, promising to return in the morning for breakfast, Emma and Ryan stood at the nursery window, watching the snow transform their world once again into a wonderland of white. Sarah slept in her crib nearby, Sadie faithfully positioned on the rug beside her. In the room across the hall, Theo dreamed peacefully, Flicker curled at the foot of his toddler bed. "Can you believe it's been almost a year?" Emma whispered, leaning into Ryan's embrace. "Sometimes it feels like that night was just yesterday, and sometimes it feels like Sadie has always been part of our lives." Ryan kissed the top of her head, his arms secure around her waist. "I think, in a way, she was always meant to be with us. All those years with Frank, then even the terrible time with Mercer, it was all leading her here, to us, to this family we've created." "Do you think that's really how life works?" Emma asked, watching the snow drift past the window. "That every path, no matter how difficult, leads exactly where we're supposed to be?" Ryan considered this, his reflection thoughtful in the darkened glass. "I don't know about supposed to be," he said finally. "But I do think that when we keep our hearts open, like Frank said, when we're willing to take a chance on love even when it's inconvenient or risky, that's when the magic happens. That's when we find our way home." Emma thought of the night she'd opened her door to a desperate mother seeking shelter from the storm. What if she'd been too cautious? What if fear had won over compassion? Everything that now made her life so rich, Sadie's quiet presence, Frank's grandfatherly wisdom, Zoe's enthusiastic friendship, even Flicker's playful energy, all would have been lost. Paths never crossed, connections never formed. "I'm glad I opened the door," she whispered more to herself than to Ryan. "So am I," he replied, understanding exactly what she meant. In the crib, Sarah sighed in her sleep, a tiny sound of perfect contentment. Sadie's ears twitched at the noise, and she lifted her head briefly before settling back down, assured all was well with her smallest charge. Outside, the snow continued to fall, building drifts against the house, covering the world in pristine white. Not a harbinger of hardship this time, but a benediction, a fresh page on which their continuing story could be written. And in that moment, wrapped in warmth and love in a house full of sleeping souls who had found each other against all odds, Emma knew with bone-deep certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be. Together. Home at last. The end.